In today's higher education environment, where liberal college students, delicate snowflakes that they are, demand safe spaces to protect their fragile sensibilities from different opinions, mainly conservative thought, the Gonzaga University College Republicans exemplify a refreshing and courageous outlook. Many of you know it was these students who brought Dinesh D'Souza to their campus earlier this year, and many of you are aware of the controversy it created. So I thought it only appropriate tonight that we invite these students back to the stage to give our keynote speaker the warmest of welcomes back to Spokane.
As many of you may have heard or seen, the Gonzaga College Republicans brought Dinesh D'Souza to our campus in February. This ignited quite the controversy when the school decided that they did not want the public of Spokane, i.e. many of you in the audience today, to be able to attend. The main reason for this absurdity is that the people in the school's administration deemed that Mr. D'Souza's ideas were contradictory to our school's social justice mission, and that they were worried that the people of Spokane and Eastern Washington, we all know as predominantly conservative areas, would think that the local university was too conservative. Isn't that funny? Since that lecture, with about 900 people in attendance, it seems as if the school has gone out of its way to prove that they are indeed not too conservative and to let us know what their social justice mission really entails. So I figured I'd give you an update on some of these events. First, since Mr. D'Souza's lecture, there have been countless counseling sessions for students and faculty who were mentally harmed by the speech. Members of the Gonzaga administration actually set up a meeting between our club and these students who were mentally harmed so that we could, in essence, apologize. And I'd like to update you that we did not. The next event was titled Dream Week, Show Support for Undocumented Zags. This event was essentially a week-long push to establish a full-ride scholarship, with the only stipulation being that the student is here illegally. Finally, in an act that definitively showed why Mr. D'Souza's event was deemed contradictory to Gonzaga's social justice mission, a very educational and very Catholic drag show, you know, where men dress up as women, was held on campus. In times like these, especially in this election year, we believe conservatives are called to be bold and not back down in the face of opposition. With that, the man who has ruffled the feathers of every type of liberal, I present to you Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm delighted and honored to be here. What an incredible crowd we have here tonight. And I'm thrilled. You know, Charles Dickens in one of his novels says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and it's been like that for me over this past year. On the happy side of things, I just got married, and my wife Debbie is here with me tonight. But I also have had some unnerving experiences, which I think are metaphor for some of the unnerving times that our country has been going through. I'm an immigrant, and Just about a year ago, I stood in a United States courtroom and heard a bailiff bark out the phrase, United States of America versus Dinesh D'Souza. And I got to tell you, as an immigrant, this sends a chill down your spine. It threw my mind back 25 years ago to the time when, at the age of 17, I came to America as an exchange student. And I still remember that moment when I first saw America. I remember the plane descending on New York City. I looked out the window and I looked at the skyline of New York. I saw the Statue of Liberty. And a very strange feeling came over me. I realized at that moment, inarticulately, but in a very real way, I realized that my life from that moment would be completely different. Why? Because I was moving from the margin of the world to the center, and because I would be able to do things in America, I would be able to be the architect of my own destiny. I would be able to write the script of my own life in a way that would never be possible if I had remained in my native country of India. And my life in America has seen the fulfillment of the American dream. It's cultivated in me a deep love for America, and my politics are based on that. But as I mentioned a moment ago, there's now also a part of me that hates America, in which my patriotism was shaken and forced me to question what is unique about America. Now, I should tell you a little bit about my heinous crime. What I did was, a college friend of mine was running for the U.S. Senate in New York. I gave her $20,000 above the campaign finance limit. The campaign finance limit is $10,000. I gave $20,000 above that limit. My motive was that she was a dear friend of mine. I was trying to help her. She wanted me to come speak at this event and that event. I was, at the time, I'd made my movie on Obama called 2016, Obama's America. So I was kind of bopping around the country, and she'd be like, come speak at this event, come meet these Indian doctors, I think they'll support my campaign. They're Indian, you're Indian, get it? And finally, out of frustration, I got this cockamamie scheme. I told two of my friends, look, write her a check for $10,000 and I'll reimburse you. Now, this is not allowed under the campaign finance law. And so I found myself being prosecuted to the hilt by the Obama administration, squadrons of FBI agents reading my books and going through my bank records and checking my tax returns. And the culmination of this was I was sentenced to spend 8 months in an overnight federal confinement center on the Mexican border. Now, about the same time that my case was migrating through the courts, another guy, this is a guy named Chatwal, an Asian Indian guy. We Asian Indians appear to specialize in the campaign finance violations area. Well, this guy gave $180,000 in straw donations to Hillary Clinton and a whole bunch of Democratic candidates. He was also found guilty of witness tampering, and he openly boasted about corruption, about trying to buy politicians. He goes before a federal judge. He gets community service and a fine, no prison, no confinement. Now, I mention this because it seems to me that one of the core issues in America today, a very important issue in this election, is the issue of justice. Now, when you talk about justice, it's not enough to say, did you break the law? You also have to ask, was the penalty proportion to the crime? Did other guys who did the same thing get roughly the same penalty? And I think what I saw in my case is that progressive justice was a total sham. And the reason this is significant is that justice is the core virtue of American liberalism. The Democratic Party's claim to rule, to win this election, is going to be hinging on the virtue of justice. Now, as Republicans, as conservatives, we often appeal to a different virtue. We appeal to freedom. We've heard that word 5 times tonight. So, what happens when we get into a fight is we play the king, freedom, but then they play the ace, justice, and they win the hand. And the reason they win the hand is that justice is the primary virtue of every society. It's an even more important virtue than freedom because we can all imagine legitimate deprivations of freedom. We deprive people of freedom all the time, and if the reason for doing it is valid, then it's okay. But there is no such thing as good injustice. Injustice is always bad. I mean, if you saw an injustice right now, your blood would boil. Imagine if I were to bring a small dog onto the stage and stomp on it. I mean, a wave of revulsion would go through the audience. Things admittedly may be different if it were a cat. Well, anyway. All I'm trying to say is, as Republicans, we should not concede the issue of justice to the other side. It's very important to contest their ideas of social justice, the fair share, and so on. And I found myself checking into this federal confinement center on the south part of San Diego. I was actually pretty jubilant at the time. I had sort of beaten the Obama administration's goal of sending me to federal prison. And so when I was on the Megyn Kelly show saying, oh, I beat the prison thing. But when I showed up at the confinement center, the guard behind the door, he goes, what prison are you coming from? And I go, well, I didn't go to prison. This is my sentence. He goes, oh, that's too bad. I go, what do you mean? He goes, white-collar prison. He goes, it's a very interesting place. He goes, you meet mayors, city aldermen, doctors who defrauded Medicare. He goes, you can bring your chessboard. They have an activities director. The food is pretty good. And I go, well, what about in here? He goes, whole different class of people. Well, turns out in a confinement center, you get the whole gamut of criminals. If someone does armed robbery, drug smuggling, coyotes, attempted murder, domestic violence, and you serve your prison term before you're released to the street, you go to a confinement center. And so ironically, I found myself in a place with a very alarming group of serious hoodlums. Now, initially, this is a little bit of an intimidating experience. Most of these guys were Hispanic. But even among the Hispanics, there are a lot of different groups and gangs. The American Hispanics, they're called Southsiders. They have their own gangs. Then the Mexicans, they have their own groups. So I was like, I can't have dinner with this guy or that guy's going to want to kill me. So I was kind of to myself. I was a kind of hermit. I mean, I did consider starting my own gang, the Asian Indian gang. It's a little problematic. I would have been the only member. But after about a month, I decided to become brave. I said, I'm actually in a very unusual place. I'm a conservative in a place where you rarely find conservatives. I mean, I'm not going to walk down the confinement center and, there's Charles Krauthammer. Or there's George Will. So I decided to start talking to people and learning, well, I'm going to call it the ideology of the criminal underclass. Now, my previous familiarity with the ideology of the criminal underclass was limited to 2 viewings of The Shawshank Redemption, in which I basically got the idea that all criminals claim that they're not guilty. But in talking to these guys, I actually realized that their point of view was different. Their view was, we are guilty, but we're the small fry. We did it, but we're kind of the stupid criminals. We got caught. That's why we're here. The big fry never get caught. The big fry are actually at large. And the big fry are never pursued by the system because they run the system. And this kind of got me thinking. Now, previously, for 25 years, I have had a career of being a writer, a speaker, a conservative intellectual, and I've looked at American politics as a kind of debate. We believe in these things, and they believe in those things. We believe in liberty, and they believe in justice. We want equality of rights. They want equality of outcomes. Now, interestingly, it is the viewpoint of the criminal underclass that this whole way of talking about politics is total and complete BS. That real human beings are never motivated by debate. When I would lie in the confinement center, we were slept on bunk beds in a room about half the size of this one, and I'd listen to people talk, and they would mainly talk about 4 things: food, sleep, money, and sex. That's it. It was a very elemental point of view. And the basic idea of these guys is that human beings are motivated by low impulses. Human beings are motivated by acquisitiveness, greed, hatred, envy, fear, revenge. And these are the actual motors of human behavior. And if this is true in life, why should it be any different in politics? So this got me to the idea that a lot of our whole Republican way of thinking about politics needs a little important modification. Because our premise is that the other side are basically good guys. They're misguided. They want the right things, they just don't get it. They just don't understand. And so for 8 years, we have been, for example, lecturing President Obama. I call this the Obama Education Project, being carried out by us. Hey, Obama, we want to remind you that Putin used to be a KGB officer, in case you didn't know. Hey, Obama, if the mullahs say that they want to build a bomb, they probably do. Hey, Obama, if you have confiscatory tax rates and burdensome regulation, that might have an adverse impact on jobs. And on we go, and Obama never seems to get it. He's an unbelievably slow learner. But, you know, let me suggest it's not because he's a dummy. He's actually doing something different. So I want to focus for a minute, because here we are in a very critical and, to be very honest, a very, very tough election. And it's very important that we, A, understand what we're up against, what actually motivates the other side, and B, to know what is it that we, not in the abstract, but practically, can do to turn the tide. So I want to actually focus on those 2 very specific questions. 1, who are those guys and what are they up to? And 2, what can I, not in general, but specifically do? if I am willing to invest the time and the effort to do it. So let me suggest that what is going on now is there is a huge effort underway to steal the most valuable thing the world has produced. And it's worth thinking for a moment, what is the most valuable thing the world has ever produced? Is it the car? Is it the airplane? Is it the computer? No. The most valuable thing the world has ever produced is the United States of America. Because the United States of America isn't just an invention, it's the invention of invention. It's the creation of a system for generating wealth. And I want to suggest that the progressives, the left, the Democratic Party, has its eyes on that prize. I don't mean it has its eyes on the federal budget, $3 trillion, or the gross domestic product, $18 trillion. No. Those guys have their eyes on the entire wealth of the whole country. All the land, and all the apples, and all the iPhones, and all the money in your bank account, and your kids' college fund, and your retirement accounts, and if you add it all up, it's about $75 trillion. That's what the United States is worth. It's one huge pile of dough. Thieves are very interested. And what the progressives want to do, I want to suggest, is nothing less than control all that wealth. Sometimes we think they want to raise our tax rate from 39% to 42%. No. They want to control the entire wealth of the country. Now, they're not socialists. In fact, they're too lazy to be socialists. A socialist wants the government to nationalize a company. We're going to nationalize the oil industry, and we're going to go ourselves to Midland, Texas, and drill all the oil out of the ground and do fracking. No. You think Bernie Sanders wants to go do that? He doesn't know how to do that. He's not concerned about, he wants the guys in Midland, Texas to drill the oil. Take it all out of the ground, put it into nice barrels, label it. Then the progressives will move in and take it over and direct how those resources will be deployed. This is the stealing of America on a gargantuan scale. And if you don't think it's happening, just think about this. In the last 8 years, the federal government has established a stranglehold over a number of private industries, banking, the whole investment industry, healthcare, every hospital, every insurance company, increasingly energy, and now the new target, education. They're doing it by promising you, young people, a free education. A free education. Now, if you think about it, education isn't actually free. If you go to Gonzaga, you need buildings, you need to pay teachers, you need facilities, you need heating. So it costs money to run a university. So it's not free. So what does Hillary mean? What does Bernie mean when they say a free education? They don't mean it's actually free. They mean somebody else will pay. But who? Well, the government will pay. But the government is $19 trillion in debt. So the government will have to borrow. But if the government borrows that money, who is that debt going to be handed to? Young people. So if you think about it, this free education amounts to the following. Essentially, what the Democrats are doing is reaching into the back pockets of young people, taking their own future earnings, and then giving some of it to them now, while declaring that they're being given a free education. this is not even robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's robbing Paul to pay Paul. while hoping that Paul is such an unbelievable sucker that he or she won't realize that this is actually what's going on. Now, I could go on in this vein, but I want to pivot a little bit because I think our big challenge here today is not what are we up against. We kind of know. What we are less sure about is what can we do? How can we actually make a difference? Not just in Washington State, but nationally. How can we actually swing things? Now, before I get to that, I want to point out that there's one very alarming thing that we have allowed to happen over the past 25 years that has gravely weakened us politically. Very often as I go around the country, the first question people ask me is, so who do you like on the Republican side for president? A couple of years ago, when I'd go around the country, I get the same question, you think the Republicans are going to take the Senate? You think we're going to have both houses of Congress? Well, we have both houses of Congress. It doesn't seem to have made a whole lot of difference. Now, why not? People say, well, that's because McConnell's a wimp. Boehner was a wimp. They're all wimps. Well, but what does that actually mean? Does Boehner and McConnell want Obama to succeed? No. So why are they behaving in the way they do? Well, the answer is that they are terrified of the media. They are terrified of being destroyed by the media. And I don't just mean exposed by the New York Times. I don't just mean that ridiculed on the evening news. I don't just mean that they will be crucified in the press. I mean that they will be the laughingstock of comedians. They'll be the butt of jokes on the part of Colbert and Jon Stewart and Bill Maher. And they will be so profoundly ridiculed that there's no way they would be invited to speak here on a podium like this. Our own side would bury them. And they know that. And fear is why they behave in the way that they do. Now, what I'm trying to say is that while we as Republicans are fighting in one small corner of the battlefield, the left has moved into and taken over the big megaphones of our culture. By megaphones, I mean the big loudspeakers that allow you to transmit information to people, and especially to young people. And so what are these megaphones? Number one, Hollywood. Number two, Broadway. Number three, the entire comedy industry. So that they have Jon Stewart, they have Bill Maher, they have Colbert. We have nobody, nobody, and nobody. So we are very weak against this kind of onslaught. And then we have to add higher education, where the more selective and prestigious the university, the bigger their stranglehold on it. And elementary and secondary education increasingly. So what this means is that they have seized the high ground of the culture. Sometimes people will ask me, well, what happened to the gay marriage debate? And my point is there really wasn't even a debate. By the time the gay marriage issue became political, it was a fait accompli. The other side was fighting gay marriage from the time Ellen came out of the closet, and Will and Grace, and 300 sitcoms. And so this cultural aggression mounted year after year, winning convert after convert. So by the time it comes up for a vote on the House of the Congress or the Supreme Court, you don't even have to have the vote. The outcome is already decided. So this is our predicament. Now, how do we fight it? We're trying to fight it. People say, well, hey, Dinesh, we sent you to Gonzaga University. But you can see that speaking on a campus is sort of hit and run. I mean, I was there on Tuesday, I'm gone on Wednesday. And then you can see the aftermath. Essentially, it's been nonstop therapy since I left to rehabilitate people. The fat and happy liberal professor who is grazing on the typical university campus is accountable to absolutely nobody. He doesn't care about the legislature, he doesn't care about the administration because he has tenure, he could care less about the parents who are happy to fork out money and don't even care where that money goes. He's obviously unaccountable to the students, he runs their lives, they don't run his life. So the truth of it is, no one can do anything to that guy. And until we figure out a way to disrupt that guy's life, we haven't actually made a dent on the campus. Now, the good news is that 30 years ago, this would be an impossible problem. We would have to start 300 campuses to try to combat or rival the left's domination of higher education. The good news today is that because of technology, we don't have to do that. But we do have to do something else. And that is, we have to figure out a way to create a kind of academic iPhone. In other words, we have to find a way to deliver education at a much lower cost. Because education is preposterously expensive. This whole education industry is a kind of albatross. So if you can actually figure out a way to deliver education at a tiny fraction of the price, you will decimate a whole industry and wipe out the left's power in it. In a sense, you don't have, it's kind of like saying that the left dominates the rotary phone industry. We don't have to take it over, but you have to create a completely effective alternative. That's our job. Now, we are in this room, looking around the room here, about 700 or 800 of us. We're actually an extremely powerful group, right here. The problem is that most of us don't use our own power. We use actually a very tiny fraction of it. Or we use it, but in the wrong place. I want to give an example of what I mean here because I want to talk about how power can be effectively used. A year and a half ago, I published a book called America, along with the film of the same name. And in a very surprise action, the retail giant Costco decided to pull all the copies of my book from every Costco in the United States. Now, this, you have to give it to them, was a brilliant strike by the left. What I mean is, Costco likes my books. They sell very well in Costco. What happened was the head brass at Costco are donors to Obama. And somebody, I don't even know who, it could have been Rahm Emanuel, it could have been anyone, walks into Costco. They go, what the heck? This guy's booking Costco? And so they make a few phone calls. Hey, Costco guys, don't you like coming to the Lincoln bedroom? Don't you like jumping up and down in the bed? Why the heck would you have this right-winger's book in your... And so Costco decided, let's pull the book. And so a Costco manager looks around, he sees all my books just 2 weeks after they were put up, being taken down. And then he finds out it's not one Costco, it's every Costco in America. Now, I don't even know about it. And this guy calls a journalist. He didn't call Megyn Kelly, he didn't call Rush Limbaugh. He calls a writer for a website called World Net Daily. And this guy writes an article, the Patriots book pulled by Costco right around the 4th of July. And there's a kind of big hubbub about it. And 1,000 people go on the World Net Daily site and rail on Costco. Censorship. But so far, Costco doesn't care. Why? Because this is a kind of an online mob, admittedly, but it's an online mob in completely the wrong place, namely WorldNet Daily. But then, a very interesting moment in the history of social media, somebody in that group decides, why are we on the WorldNet Daily site? Let's migrate to the Costco site. And so the snowball now begins to roll to Costco, except now it's picking up snow, and by the time it gets there 24 hours later, it's now 17,000 people. A big number, but not that big. It's basically 20 times the number of people in this room. And these 17,000 people, in about 24 hours, completely destroy the Costco website. Now, I don't mean that they do any vandalism or any of that. Not at all. It's just that when you buy stuff on Costco, whether it's a pair of jeans or wine or toilet paper, you can give customer reactions. Except now, if you went on the Costco site anywhere in the world and clicked on Costco, you'd see people all over the country, super mad, cutting up their Costco cards and sending it in small pieces back to the CEO, telling him where he could put it. So the CEO makes an emergency phone call to my publisher, and 24 hours later, I'm on a plane to Seattle to meet him. And when I see him, the first line out of his mouth is, "Dinesh, you are destroying Costco." Yeah. I'm destroying a multi-billion-dollar corporation all by myself. Now, I pointed out to him that A, I didn't even know about this. B, in fact, he kept saying to me, "What are your demands?" I think he thought I was Jesse Jackson. He was looking for my non-negotiable demands. And I told him, I said, "Hey, I don't have any demands. You don't have to carry my book. It's just super odd that once you had it, you decided to pull it, and quite frankly, you've ticked off your own customers." Now, to his credit, I think he got it, because by the time my plane had landed back in San Diego, Costco had publicly announced, number one, they were rescinding the ban. Number two, my books were already back on the shelves. Number three, they were going to order 25,000 new books. And number four, when my movie came out 2 weeks later, they had already built a special standee bigger than this podium. So all the DVDs were on the main table. My DVDs were on their standee. Now here's the point I'm trying to make. This is called using power with laser-like effectiveness. It's called striking in such a way. Costco is one of the world's most beloved corporations. Brand loyalty for that company is through the roof. And yet, this small incident was so serious that the CEO made it extremely clear to me that if something was not reversed, he would no longer be the CEO of Costco. Because Costco does 1/2 of its global business online. So no company can afford that kind of attack. And so I mention this only because it shows power in the age of social media. 10 years ago, you'd have to write a letter, and they would throw it away. But now, here we have 800 of us, and all of us have Facebook, and we have Twitter, and we have hundreds of people that we communicate with, and all of them have hundreds of their friends. So we suddenly have a juggernaut of information. I want to talk for a moment about movies. So I've completely changed my career. I used to be writer, speaker. But then I realized that there's just a limited number of people you can reach that way. I actually got the idea for making the movie 2016 from Michael Moore. I remember that he made Fahrenheit 9/11. He dropped it in the middle of the 2004 campaign. I basically go, that guy can do it. How hard can it be? Now, I got to tell you, I'm not under any illusion that documentary films are the gold standard of Hollywood. They're not. Feature films are. The big guy in Hollywood is not Michael Moore, Steven Spielberg. The real Hollywood messages don't come in documentary films, they come in romantic comedies, in thrillers, in animated films, in horror films. At the end of the day, if you want to compete in the culture of entertainment, we have to go there too. Now, for this year, I'm making a film. It's not just about Hillary. It's about the whole history of progressivism and the Democratic Party. And my idea is to release the film in the third week of July, which is to say in the week of the Democratic National Convention. Now, it is well, the film will open wide, as they say. It'll open in 1,500 to 1,800 theaters, so it'll be everywhere. But it's a little-known secret of films that the fate of a film depends critically on how it does opening weekend. The whole of Hollywood is watching that number. And if the film does well in opening weekend, it goes from 1,800 theaters to 2,500 theaters. And if it does poorly in opening weekend, it goes from 1,800 theaters to 1,300 theaters. So in other words, people say, well, how can we make sure that your film is seen not just by Republicans, but by independents and the very people who will make a difference? Well, the way for that to happen is for you to go see the film opening weekend. And not just to go, but to take friends, to bring Gonzaga students. See, I'm not asking you to do $1,000 or $100. It's $10 to buy a ticket. But by doing it then, you're putting fuel in our rocket. And that's what I mean by multiplying your influence. Okay, Washington is a blue state. California is a blue state. Texas is a red state. So I'm speaking at the Women's Republican group in Dallas. They say, what can we do to influence the election? We're in a red state. Our votes don't really matter. Or in California, we're in a blue state. The Republicans aren't going to win California. What can we do? Well, the truth of it is, and I only use the movie for illustration because that's my contribution to the messaging in this critical election. But if you like the messaging, the film comes out in DVD at the end of September, 1 month before the election. Now, the fact of it is, if this is a normal election, it will be decided in swing states. Let's say a dozen states. There are probably 1.5 to 3 million voters in those states who will decide the election. The names and addresses of those voters is known. The RNC has it. So in other words, you can decide, I can't do this because I've tangled enough with the election laws. But you can do this. As a party, you say, all right, we're going to identify 50,000 voters in Ohio and Florida and Colorado and North Carolina, and we're going to deliver this message, or our message, it can be any message. We're going to drop this DVD in the mailbox 30 days before the election. Now that is a lethal strike, because the Republican Party and the PACs are going to spend hundreds of dollars winning a single vote. And people are going to be seeing the same commercials until a very constipated expression appears on their face of just pure disgust. But this is a completely different way. You're bypassing the normal, highly expensive channels, and you're delivering information directly to the guy who's going to decide the issue. So that is called using creative power in a very focused way. Lincoln once said that America is ruled by public opinion. But he did not mean that America is ruled by the opinions of the public. because the ordinary guy is not involved. The ordinary guy doesn't even care. The ordinary guy will vote every 2 or 4 years if it isn't raining. But Lincoln's point is that there's a smaller group of people, a subset. I would estimate that group today to be about 500,000 people. And these are the people who are actively involved. You can be a delegate, you can be a blogger, you can be involved in an activist group, but if you are hands-on in American politics, you are one of that rarefied subset of people who are setting the goalposts within which all politicians must move. So what this means is that there is an opportunity for us, not us in general, us, right here, to actually have a disproportionate impact at a factor of 5 or 10 or even 100. I think the main thing keeping us back is we kind of feel intimidated and we kind of feel like the other guys have all the power. I want to end tonight by telling you the story that a professor of mine once told me about the lion tamer and the lion. So here's the lion. And here's the lion tamer, a little guy with a stick, and the lion tamer is doing his little twirling moves, and the lion is obediently responding. And so now my professor raises an interesting question. Who is actually more powerful, the lion tamer or the lion? Well, it's obviously the lion. But now we have a mystery. If the lion is more powerful, why is the lion so sycophantically and obediently following the dictates of the lion tamer? And the reason is that the lion doesn't know its own power. The lion thinks the lion tamer is more powerful. And so here we are, America, and the theft that is underway is not normal theft. It's democratic theft. For the progressives to steal from us, they need our consent or our acquiescence. But if we don't give it, and if we mobilize against them, this theft can't go on. Now, sometimes people talk about the makers and the takers. Oh, there are so many takers, Dinesh, that they're going to outnumber the makers. Nonsense. The takers don't outnumber the makers. The reason the Democrats win elections is not because they just say, we are a greedy bunch of guys and we want to pick everybody's pockets. They appeal to morality. They appeal to social justice. And they appeal to the history of the Democratic Party. We, the Democrats, have always been the party of human rights and civil rights and human dignity. We have been fighting for the little guy and the black guy and the immigrant and the woman and the outsider. That's who we are. Well, it's the theme of our movie that this whole business of social justice and the whole history of the Democratic Party is a massive fraud. That in fact, the Democrats, it's not just that they're the party of slavery. Slavery has existed since the dawn of mankind. What the Democrats came up with is what is sometimes called the idea of slavery as a positive good. In every society where slavery exists, people go, it's a bad idea, but it's a social necessity. Somebody has to do the work. The Democrats are the first people in world history to come up with the idea that slavery is actually beneficial to the slave. And people say, well, Dinesh, come on, you're telling us antebellum history. Yes, the Democrats are the party of slavery, but slavery ended in 1965. Yes, but after slavery ended, the Democrats got to work again, and they came up with a whole series of new institutions. They came up with segregation. They came up with Jim Crow. They invented the Ku Klux Klan. They came up with lynching, night riding, burnings, arson, forced sterilization, support for fascism in the 30s, the internment of the Japanese in World War II. Now, the ingenuity of the Democrats, and this is partly why we haven't been able to hold them to account, is they've taken all their crimes and relabeled it America. America did this. America did slavery. America did segregation. But America didn't do those things, they did. And now in a move of unbelievable audacity, having poisoned the wells, the Democrats themselves are showing up as the water commissioner. In other words, the Democrats are claiming to save us from these problems that they caused. So, as Republicans, we have a lot of work to do because elections are won by fighting these issues intellectually, fighting them culturally, seizing a hold of the megaphones of the culture so we can get our message out. This is ultimately how we win the battle. So it's not that we lack resources, it's not that we lack people, but I think since the 80s, we have lost some of our creativity and we have allowed the Democrats to seize the high ground. The good news is this is not a lost cause. People say, well, yeah, but look at all the divisiveness. Never Trump, never Cruz. My position is really simple. Never Hillary. I think if we keep our eye on the ball, I think if we unite as a party, if we pool our creativity, if we're willing to try some new ways of doing things, we will find that we are actually in a very rare and privileged position. It's not often in the country's history that it falls upon a group of people the responsibility to restore or save their own country. In fact, America is set up in such a way that we happily don't normally need to do that. We're kind of like when you live in a house, you don't consult the blueprints of the house. You just sleep on the couch, walk in the hallways. It's only when the house begins to shake that you say, hey, I better go to the attic, I better look at those blueprints, I better look at things, in a sense, at the level of first principles. So it is our burden, but it's also our privilege to be living in one such time. And so it is up to us, not eventually, but now, to mobilize for the great task ahead. And if we do that, we will be worthy successors to the great people who fought and established and unified and protected this country. It is our job, ladies and gentlemen, today to restore it. Thank you very much. Thank you.